in just a second, and then I'm gonna change the chat over so we can see when chats if anybody jumps on and if it's chat. Sometimes we won't get people for a little bit; they'll hop on a little bit late. It usually gets recorded, and then people tend to watch it later, watch it afterwards. Are you guys lambing right now, or?
Yes, we are right in the middle of it. We've got about 35 or so on the ground, and I've got a group of about 6 more that I'm literally watching on my phone right now.
Okay, so you guys have cameras that are out there that you watch them with, or?
I do. Yep.
Okay, good deal.
Arlo.
Okay. So the camera works through Wi-Fi, or is it through the cellular service, or how does it work?
These are Wi-Fi, so we put a hotspot down at the barn, so they have their own dedicated Wi-Fi, and then it goes to like a hub, and I can just log into it anywhere.
Okay, good deal. So for anybody that's watching, if you guys have any questions, anything you want to talk about, or any questions that you have, just go and type it in the chat. We can see it, and then we'll answer it. So this is Jamie and her husband, Hobie. Is that how you say it?
That's right.
Okay. And Jamie is one of our moderators on the TAC Box, so you guys probably know her from there. Have you guys been having any? We were just talking about lambing. I know we just started to drop some lambs on the ground today. Jamie, have you guys had any issues so far this season, or has it been good?
It was really good the first part. Didn't have to help anybody. Everybody was doing good. We ran out of grass pretty early this year thanks to the drought, and so we had to put a group of ewes up on feed. Some of those lambs got too big, and so we would have to end up helping some toward the end of this group. Definitely more so than what we like having to help.
So do you guys decide, at what point do you step in? I know I'll let them go for a little bit, and if mom's pushing for, 10, 15 minutes and I'm not seeing any progress, usually I'll pull them. Or obviously if I see a breach, I'm going to pull them immediately. What do you guys kind of have a method of when you decide you're going to pull them or when you don't?
Basically, for me, if they've been crying, if they've been in labor for 30 minutes or so and we're not seeing progress, and to me, it depends on if it's the first time mama versus one that's had lambs before. If it's the first time mama, they tend to go a little bit longer, so I have a little bit more leeway with how much time I give them. But my main thing is if they're making progress. So if they're pushing and you're starting to see some heat, I'll give them a little bit longer. If they're pushing and you start to see a nose or nothing else happening in 30 minutes, I'm at least going to reach in there and feel and see if there's something that's wrong. I try my best to let them have it on their own again, but
I go faster.
Yeah, she's a nurse.
If they're pushing for 10 minutes, if I'm going to check, I'm pulling it. I want it done and over with.
Sometimes I find that if I let them go too long, the baby tends to get a little bit more weak. I mean, obviously you're getting there, cranial pressure, things like that, and the baby might be a little slow to get up if they're in labor longer. And then for breech, I assume you guys do the same thing I do. You're looking for the hoof presentation. If you're seeing the bottom of the hoof, this is not right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I always tell people, normal, you're seeing them come out like this. If you see bottoms of the feet, there's a problem. Our first one that went early this year, we lost it, and it had to have been. There was nothing else. It was full term. Everything looked fine, and it was just dead on arrival. So I'm thinking that probably might have been the culprit. Hobie, is there any genetic play in that? Do you find, or do either one of you guys find if a mom has breech, it's going to be that way in the future, or not really?
I haven't really noticed a correlation with it. Probably some of it is too, and to the point if we are having trouble, we're to the point that we pull hard. So we're not giving them a second chance. If they're problematic, if our little boy's attached to it, we need to keep it kind of thing. But for the most part, we're going to pull it if it's a problem because we've got enough to deal with on a regular basis without
Yeah.
problems.
We had quite a few this year, and last year, this year, that get shoulder lock. Like one leg, for whatever reason, doesn't extend all the way. And I don't know if that's so much a function of they got them a little too big by feeding them, or maybe we do jump in too quick and they would straighten out on their own and be fine. But I definitely noticed the yearlings that had that problem when they were being born. I've had a handful that when they're lambing have had that same problem. We're kind of getting to the point now where we've had enough generations that I can kind of look at it. And so again, I don't know if it's just they tend to be fatter and so they have the same issue. But yeah, that one shoulder just kind of gets locked up and you gotta, as soon as you get it out, then the lamb can come out no problem. But
I feel that body condition and nutrition playing in that last month of gestation plays a big role in that. Like she was saying earlier, the ones that we've had to pull or help with, they have been heavier ewes and they have had a little bit more feed or a little bit more time on feed than the ones that we haven't had to help or intervene with.
I'm muting myself between us because they're saying some feedback. Can you guys see the chat on your screen?
Let me hold on. There we go.
Yeah.
You guys want to tackle any of those?
Let's see. Who does your artwork? That was going to be for you, Tim, because I've asked you the same question. Is 30 minutes the right threshold? I feel like at 30 minutes, you don't run a whole lot of risk. If you let them go for 30 minutes, you're probably okay, unless something is severely going wrong. But at 30 minutes, you're okay. Much longer than that, you may run into issue. But I feel like 30 minutes is kind of what most, but kind of the longest you want to look at them before you do something if you need to.
I think to kind of add to that, it's if you actually see them when they start at minute one.
Yeah.
A lot of times you catch them and they've already been pushing for 30 minutes.
Yep.
You got to keep that in mind too.
I kind of go by if they're down and when they're pushing, their back legs are straight out and they're lolling that head back. Watch them for 10 minutes, and if they've not made any progress, you might want to check them because they could have been, like you said, pushing for 30 minutes before then.
Yeah, I agree. We had a question on there about how much grain do you have a nursing ewe? That's a loaded question. You guys tackle that one? There is no good answer for that one, is there?
No. It's going to depend on your breed. It's going to depend on how many she's nursing. So in our situation, we raise Dorpers, which are a very heavy milking breed. Most other professionals kind of look at them on par with the dairy lines. So we kind of have to feed to support that lactation. Anywhere we feed a 16% protein, 4% fat feed that a local feed mill makes for us. I would say on one nursing singles, somewhere in the 2 pounds a day range. If I've got one doing 2 big, strong ram lambs, they may be more in the 3 pounds a day range. And then on top of that, we feed alfalfa in the winter anyway. And so if, it's nothing on the ground for them to eat other than what I'm feeding them, 3 pounds a day would probably be where I'd need to be at. Now, if you've got one small ewe lamb, probably doesn't need quite as much. We feed to body condition kind of, so I'm looking at them, putting my hands on them. If they're getting too fat while they're nursing, I back them down. If the majority of them are starting to look like they're being drugged down a little bit, I'll add a little more, or add some extra corn or something along those lines.
Do you run into issues with mature ewes and juveniles where you've got the big ones push little ones out and Do you have to deal with that? Do you deal with that by segregating, or how do you deal with that?
We actually just had to pull out. We've got a set of 16-month, I think, ewe lambs or yearlings that both had twins. They had a ewe lamb and a ram lamb, and those are about 4 or 5 weeks old right now. We just segregated them out from our main flock because we noticed they were being pulled down a little bit, and they are a little more timid, I guess you'd say, at the feed bunk, and so they've kind of gotten pushed off a little bit. And so as soon as we notice if anything's starting to get pulled down beyond where we want them to be, we separate them out. The best thing you can do is just, look at them. Look at them every day if you can. Look at them every several times throughout the course of a week. Put your hands on them. Get your hands on their back and see, especially on the wool breeds, you have to actually lay your hands on them. If they've dropped more than what you're comfortable with, you need to find a way to segregate them out, whether that's permanently or just at feeding time. I know we've got some friends that can't separate them completely. They'll move them to another small area, feed them, and then turn them back out. Now, I know when you've got 200, that's not really logical, but if you've got the opportunity and the ability to do it, that would be the way to go.
The answer to the question of who does our artwork, it is me. So I don't know if that's a good. If you find it good or bad, I'm the one that does everything. I run the website and do everything. Do you guys breed in smaller groups, or do you breed to have everyone lamb at the same time?
Both.
So ideally, I do groups of about 10. So we have a main flock, and then we have a smaller AI group that we bring some outside genetics in on. That group usually is lambing separately from my main flock. Last year, I had about 30 lamb within a month of each other, and then I had the AI group outside of that same window. This year, I didn't plan it quite so well, and we had to run everybody together because, like we said, we're in a drought and kind of ran out of space and grass. And so I've kind of been lambing since November 15th, and I've still got about a quarter of my flock to go. They're just kind of all stretched out. It is not ideal. I will say, it is not ideal.
I prefer that tighter season. If you can kind of tighten that up a little bit within really a 3-month window would be great, but we had some, like she said, outside circumstances this time, grass, and we just had to do what we had to do.
But even when it comes to feeding, vaccinating, tail docking, castration, all those things, having groups together can make a big difference with just the labor and the timing that's involved, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
If you can work them all instead of having to work the group, 2, 3, 4 times, if you can work them all once or twice even, it helps tremendously. You don't have to have as much vaccine waste. You don't have the labor involved. You can wean as groups. I tend to find they do so much better if those weaning groups are closer, both in age but in size. If you've got 15 ram lambs out in the field together, and some of them are 40 pounds and some of them are 80 pounds, you're going to run into issue.
Yeah, and some of these animals are
the big
more aggressive at nursing too. So sometimes if you wean just a portion, you'll get ones that are stealing, or God forbid, you've got them stealing colostrum off the moms that haven't even birthed yet.
Yeah. We do separate the ewes that have lambed. They go into a different field with their lambs. I kind of let them lamb in their normal where they've been, unless I just happen to catch them and I'm like, you're probably going to lamb tonight. But for the most part, I'll let them lamb in where they're familiar, just to kind of cut down on the stress. And then as soon as they've popped out at least one of those lambs, they go to either to a jug or to a different field, to cut down on that. I don't like having a mixed group, for lack of a better word. I want to be able to look at a ewe and be like, yep, You've had your babies already. Not you're supposed to lay them sometimes in the next week.
We had a question on there about creep feeding. How soon do you start creep feeding? And when you're looking at creep feed, what are you looking at for your creep feed? Are you trying to hit a certain protein? Or are you trying to hit a certain fat protein mix? What does that look like for you guys?
So we have creep available pretty much from the time we start lambing. So again, that field that we put the mamas and babies in has creep available in it. Our creep feed is based off our normal base ration, and then we add or have the meal add soybean meal to kind of increase that protein some. We strive for about an 18% protein. My base is a little higher in fat already, so it's about a 4% fat. And again, it's available to them from day one, basically. Usually takes them about 2 weeks to really start hitting on it if there's others already in that field eating it. When the first group start, it may take them a little longer to start hitting it, but once one or two of them figure it out, they all figure it out.
We've had some that kind of the first batch or the first group that we have lamb, before we ever get the creep out, the first day or so, we'll see some of those babies trying to eat with a mama. Like it's crazy to me how soon they do want or thrive to try to eat. So yeah, I mean, if it's out there and it's available, I think they're gonna go after it sooner than you think.
Yeah, I agree. I think having somebody teach them makes a big difference. So, a question from Jeff Emberton. Hey, Jeff, thanks for the question. So, why don't you give us we had some mic problems and stuff like that when we started. So we got off to kind of a rocky start. But why don't you tell us a little bit about your farm, where you guys are located, and what you're raising, things like that. So for those of you that are dropping on, if you don't know, this is Jamie. You guys have seen Jamie, or you've heard Jamie a lot on the TAC box. So you're used to her. She's our main moderator on the TAC box. So yeah, guys, tell us a little bit about what you're doing and where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Jamie. This is my husband, Hobie. We are Wilson White Dorpers. We are located about 2 hours south of Nashville, just over the Alabama line. So kind of an hour outside of Huntsville and 2 hours south of Nashville. We raise almost exclusively registered white Dorper. We have a kind of mixed flock of both purebred and full blood, depending on, if you know anything about Dorpers, they kind of have a split in the registry. We do mostly seed stock, so we do more toward the breed standard versus your club lamb style. We're more kind of production based. We have a 5-year-old who shows kind of some of the local shows, and then we do some state fairs and that kind of stuff. We mostly sell off the farm to individuals, and then we also have, the meat side. Dorpers are a strictly meat breed. They are a hair sheep. And so we sell, most of our ram lambs go toward that end. We do have quite a few breeders every year that go to, different farms. A lot of commercial breeders like the Dorpers over Katahdins or black bellies, just to kind of add that extra meat to those breeds. But yeah, that's kind of, we've been doing this since about 2019. Hobie is a vet. That's what kind of got us into sheep. We had some clients that got us interested in it. And so coming from that background, I was like, I think we can do this. And so we kind of jumped full tilt into it. We started with about 20 commercial ewes, and now we're up to about 60. So
it's good for the kids. I think they're a nice size animal. We've raised all of our girls with the farm, and it's been really good for them as far as they learn science, they learn math, learn lots of things that really benefit them as far as interacting with the animals. And then obviously, responsibility and things like that, it seems to work out really good for them. So 2 questions on there. Hobie, you want to tackle this one? Brian wants to know, he says, is it best to hold a yearling over another year before breeding? He said, it seems with my yearlings, it slows down their growth and they tend to produce small lambs. I think some of that can have to do with what's the condition, because those rams, as you guys know, they'll run themselves stupid, breed and use, and a lot of people undervalue the conditioning of those rams, putting them in there. But I know there's more to that. What's your thoughts on that one?
So we've done it both ways. We've had some that we have tried to breed, as soon as they're able to breed, 8 to 10 months. But like you said, you've got to kind of keep it in perspective. Don't expect, especially on the ram side, don't expect a ram that's 8 months old to cover 40 ewes. You want, basically, if you've got a small flock, I think you'll be fine. It depends on the breed too. Like our breed, they seem to be really fertile. They seem to start being interested in breeding as early as 3 months. They'll be out there in the field trying to ride each other. But on the ewe side, I do feel like waiting just a little bit longer, letting them mature just a little bit. I feel like we have had better luck with lambing and them being able to raise and sustain a good lamb after they've had it that way.
Nutrition plays a big part in that too.
It does.
If you're on a pasture-based system, you may be better off letting them get to 14 months, 16 months before you put a ram in with them. The ones that we breed, these January born ewes that we breed in, late in the fall of their same year, you do have to supplement them. They're not going to be able to maintain a pregnancy and themselves on just pasture in most situations. You are going to have to provide some supplemental nutrition, be it in the form of either a really good quality, maybe something like alfalfa hay, or legume peanut hay is kind of popular in this area, or supplemental grain, hard feed. You can't really expect them to grow themselves and 1 or 2 lambs without some kind of assistance in that regard.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of it comes down to different breeds and the way those breeds raise their babies, the size of the babies, what you can expect. There's some people that say, you just throw them on a pasture and you forget about them and you let them do their thing. And if that's what you want to do, you can develop a flock to do that. You have to have realistic expectations of what it is that you're going to get. We have grain-fed black-faced wool breeds here on the farm that are dropping 16, 17-pound babies. You get a hair sheep that gets no supplement. You may have a 4-pound baby. It just depends. And then you do goofy things like I do. Like this year, I picked up. We're always doing science experiments here on the farm. So I have a couple of pasture-raised hair sheep on one of my Suffolk rams, and now I'm chasing them around with vaginal prolapse and I knew better than to do that. It happens, but that's here nor there. So more questions. Great question, Brian, by the way. Thank you. Alicia, thank you for the question. Alicia, question I get all the time, and I know you guys probably see all the time. How do I know they're getting close to delivery? Is there any signs? So she's probably she bought some sheep in September. They were pregnant. And now, what are some tips you can give people? Like, if you see this, it means you're probably getting close to lambing.
There we go. Sorry, you went away for a second. So first and foremost, and I tell everybody this, if you purchased sheep, if you want them to be pregnant, they're not going to be. If you didn't want them to be pregnant, they're going to be. So with that in mind, the first thing you'll probably notice is that, when you're wanting to know if they're getting close, is you'll start to notice putting on a bag. Their udder will start to get some development. If they're ewe lambs and have never had lambs before, it'll be a lot more noticeable than if they've had lambs previously. The best thing you can do, if they'll let you, is actually put your hand on their udder. It will, if they're not really close, it'll feel empty, like it'll just feel like skin. As they get closer and start actually ramping up some of that milk production, their udder will start to fill out, and you will actually feel mass substance to that udder. As far as if they're pending, like, within the next couple of weeks going to have lambs, you'll definitely notice them getting wider. Hopefully, if they're on a, decent enough plane of nutrition, you'll notice their flanks filling in when they are about to lamb. So within the next, 24 hours, 24, 48 hours, their udder will definitely bloom out. And so by bloom, I mean it will look full. Usually you'll get a crease down the middle of it. And their teats will start to look a little thicker, a little more engorged. I usually tell people their teats will go from looking like your pinky to looking like your thumb. It'll start to kind of fill with milk. And the udder will get more pink, unless it's a wool breed that has wool on their udder. That's a whole other ball game. But in a typical, you'll notice it becoming more pink to red. And then, 12 to 24 hours ahead of time, their vulva will start to get a little more pink and a little more puffy, and they'll hold their tail off of it just a little bit. And then, once you start seeing discharge or a water bag or, any, God forbid, feet, then you're right there.
And their flank, they'll sink in a little bit in their flank.
It'll kind of drop, yeah.
If you can kind of, especially with the hair sheep, you can see their cover a little better. You'll see kind of they'll be like a barrel shape, and then all of a sudden they kind of look more like a pear. And then when they start to look like a pear, that baby's dropped and it's moving into position. And, I wish I could say that's 24 hours within time, but we've had some that's done that and gone a week, but at least you're close when that happens.
They'll stop eating usually, or at least slow down. They won't be quite as aggressive at the feed bunk usually. We usually see them in about 24 hours, really. The night before or the morning of when we feed, they're just not really interested. They may come up and sniff at the feed and maybe take a couple mouthfuls, and then they'll back up and kind of look around, look mad at the world, like they don't want to be here anymore.
Especially with these Dorpers, because they are chow hounds.
Yes.
They will eat when they are literally being eaten. They like food that much. So if they're not eating, something's about to happen. They're close.
Do you guys get?
And then also
go ahead.
Ours, and this may be a Dorper thing, I'm not sure. Ours will, for the most part, separate themselves completely. They will go somewhere away from everybody. They'll go around the side of the barn to another side, or off down into the trees. The Dorpers that we have and that friends have are notorious for taking off to the back 40 all by themselves and going to have their lambs back there. And then you have to go hunt them down. So, if you have the available space or the option to kind of bring them up in an area where they can't get away from you necessarily, if you do need to help them, it will help a lot. I know that's not always an option, but if you can catch one before they start taking off down the hill, it'll help you in the long run.
I notice ours will start nesting. They'll start pawing at the ground when they're getting really close labor. Do you guys notice that as well?
It depends on where they're at. Yeah. If they are up in the barn or in a bedded area, yes. But out in the field, the Dorpers at least don't tend to. They tend to move around a lot. Even once they have one lamb, if they're having multiples, they'll have one, get that lamb up, and they may move 50 feet down the field to go lay down and have their other. They don't tend to nest quite as much as my experience has been with other breeds, from what I've heard anyway. They're more, I guess that probably plays back to where they were developed in South Africa, out on the big open range. They kind of move a little bit to try to, I guess, probably get rid of some of that smell and some of that danger. And so again, if you can get them at least into a confined area, it may help you out a lot.
Yeah, I agree. We'll notice nesting a lot more with the wool breeds than we do with the hair breeds. We'll also notice nesting a lot depending on where they're at. If they have straw bedding that's down, they're going to nest a little more. But far and away, the wool breeds tend to nest more than the hair sheep do. And again, that kind of goes off of what she said. She said you can kind of go there mentally and say, your wool breed would generally be lambing in dead grass more than likely in a pasture situation, as opposed to dry, more dirt or caliche, something like that. So that makes. I got a question on here, and I know you guys. It's general. Well, I would say you don't get much snow, but this year you sure as hell have. But I got a question about. They got wild swings in their temps, so they're negative 20 at night. They're 20s during the day. How old are the lambs when you let them out in the snow? So that's kind of a two-pronged question. Hobie, a lot of people don't understand how sheep and goats generate body heat. And without going into the deep weeds of science, they generate body heat through their rumen, correct? Is a lot of how the body heat is generated in the animals. Can you kind of touch on that and explain how that differs from like us, for example?
Oh yeah. So with adult sheep, that they have a functioning rumen, so most of their heat is help being generated by the bugs that's in that rumen that helps to digest their food. So they put off a lot more heat internally because of that. Lambs are a little bit more tricky because they don't have a functioning rumen when they are first born. They nurse off of mama, and then the more roughage, the more stuff they eat, the older they get, they start to develop that rumen, and that's a whole nother topic on its own. But you got to be a little bit more careful with them. I feel like if they are able to keep their body temp up and they are nursing the mama and they are wagging their tail, jumping around, and they seem to be, thriving, for lack of a better term, they're probably okay to turn out. We don't put them out, especially this year when we had the snow. We don't put them out when it's the first day. We usually keep them up at least 24 hours, make sure they are actually nursing and they know who mama is and where to go to get that warmth and that milk. We've had a couple that were just kind of, they wasn't really thriving as well, and we've kept them up to sometimes 3 days in the jugs. For the most part, though, as mild as our temperatures are, 24 hours is plenty for us.
I've never seen negative 20 in my life.
No.
I'm sorry. I can't help you with that one. I would probably die.
Yeah, it's an issue up here. And kind of going off of what Hobie was saying, and the other thing to keep in mind is a lot of people, and I'm not a fan of it, but it's neither here nor there. We'll address it. The people that are getting bottle lambs and bottle goat kids, you need to treat them differently than you would treat a baby that's on mom. As Hobie was saying, they're getting some of that. They're drinking mom's milk. They're getting some heat from mom. If you notice a regular baby that's on mom, they're nursing. They're getting little snacks all day long. Where if you're dealing with a bottle lamb and they're only getting that warm bottle twice a day, in my experience, they're gonna have a whole lot more difficult time regulating their body heat. They don't have an adult to cuddle up with, for one. They're not getting frequent feedings, for another. They're generally going to be more stressed. So you need to be really cautious with that. Now, the wool breeds, a lot of our wool breeds, they can drop them in the snow and they seem to do a little bit again. It has to do with that breed. I think the wool tends to repel a little bit of that moisture a little bit when the hair does as well. But again, we're kind of like you guys. Part of raising sheep and goats, and part of the fun of raising sheep and goats, is going out there every day, laying eyes on them, keeping up with what's going on with them. And you'll notice if you see those babies hunched up, if they're hunching up, generally speaking, they're trying to conserve body heat, and that's kind of a sign that we may need to do some things here to keep them warm than they are. So great question. Sam Summers said they're never ready when you think they are, and then you're too late when this happened. You know, some of these moms need to be shy. Like you can see a mom that's in labor and she won't drop that baby until you leave. At least that's the way we have some of ours. They're weird animals.
Yep.
Good question, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you guys made a video about this, and this is we could do a whole show on this, but Alicia asked, she said, anything we need to have on hand to prepare before birthing and for potential problems, and do I need to have birthing lube? So those are all that, like, you guys could probably do a 2-hour show on that one, but I'll let you guys kind of take it away with that. So we got new people, they don't have supplies. There's some like must-have things that people have to have before the baby's at the ground.
Well, first and foremost, your veterinarian's number. And I know a lot of people don't necessarily have quick access to a veterinarian. If you have that option, definitely, they're your best resource as far as, at least for us. I can't tell you how many times I've had clients call, in a panic, and I can just talk them through, tell them what to do, have them describe what they're feeling, and then I can usually get them to go, get the majority of the problems fixed that way. As far as stuff to have on hand, first and foremost, lube is really helpful. Well, yeah, a halter being first and foremost. But, yeah, buddy. Sorry, here. Our 5-year-old wanted to say hi. Can you say hi?
Hi.
Okay, back in there, please. A halter, yeah, or a helper, but I know a helper, at least for me, is hard to come by some days. A halter, so you can tie them up, whether that be to a fence, a bumper of your truck, whatever. Definitely lube. There's preferences around that. Some people like the big style with the pump. I've really liked J jelly lately. It's thicker, especially if you're lambing when it's warmer. It stays where you put it a little better. Some kind of either baling twine or rope, like a thin piece of like paracord. If you are having to push a lamb back in to reposition, get a head turned or something like that, I find it helpful to put a piece of twine around the legs, if you find the legs, so you can keep them coming the right direction while you reposition the head. As far as actually getting a lamb out, those are kind of going to be your biggest two. A head snare, if you can get your hands on one, is helpful. I personally have a hard time sometimes getting it positioned around how it needs to be. I kind of do better just feeling around with my hands. Don't be afraid to, pull on an ear or grab a bottom jaw and kind of gently, but be able to manipulate it around. They're not as fragile as you think they are, especially while they're coming through the birth canal. They're really flexible. There's some hormones and some muscle relaxant in play that lets them kind of be positioned well. I feel like people are really leery of getting in there and helping. But I promise you're not going to cause more harm than would happen if they got stuck.
And here's the thing, you're going to mess up.
Yeah.
I mean, it happens to me. I went to school to do this stuff, and you mess up. Things happen. So, the things that you don't try to help with is definitely not going to go good. But if you try to help and you jump in, you're going to save some of them. So you got to look at it that way too.
Looking at some of the textbooks and some of the online diagrams you'll see that help you be able to visually identify the different body parts of a lamb are helpful. So you'll find the images online that show, kind of some of the different presentations you might see. That helps a lot. Close your eyes, reach your hand and feel around, figure out what is what and what is where. That goes a long way. As far as that actual dystocia goes, so a lamb with a twisted neck or a leg back or, breech or something like that, being able to identify what you're feeling is helpful. beyond the actual getting a lamb out problems, we always recommend people keep injectable calcium or an oral calcium product, a CMPK or a high potency calcium gel. Any of the cattle products are usually easier to find, and you would dose them the same just for a 100-pound ewe versus a 800-pound cow. We find that the high potency calcium gel, if you've got a ewe down with milk fever, that brings them around usually pretty quickly. That's always something you can try at home before you have to get a vet involved. You're never going to hurt by giving calcium. If you've got a ewe that is, you don't usually run into it as much with singles, but if you have a ewe that had twins or triplets or beyond, you may run across milk fever from time to time. You're never going to hurt by giving calcium to a ewe that is slow or sluggish or down. Even retained placentas can be a sign of milk fever. And so if you've got a ewe that hasn't dropped her placenta in, 24, 48 hours, a dose of calcium sometimes will get them to go ahead and drop that. And you may not need to, go the route of antibiotics and that kind of stuff if they drop it on their own that way. Beyond that, some pharmaceuticals from your veterinarian that are going to be on a case-by-case basis. Propylene glycol, yeah. If you've got it before lambing, if you've got a ewe down that's heavy bred, 9 times out of 10, you're going to, be dealing with a ketosis or a pregnancy toxemia issue, and propylene glycol is good to bring them out of that. Cheap boxed red wine has a lot of studies coming out now saying that it does a really good job of breaking ketosis. And a lot of times they'll drink it on their own. If you, give them a cup or two in front of them in a bowl, they'll slurp it down a lot of times, and that gives them a really rapid, easily digestible source of energy, and they can pop right back up really quick with that. Now then, once you get them up, you need to look at your nutrition program, but it gets them up quick and usually can save those lambs in their belly.
And it's good to plan ahead and have those things on hand, because it never fails. It's on a weekend or in the middle of the night,
holiday,
and these things happen, and you can't find this stuff in a store because there's no stores open. So that's just kind of just off the top of our head some of the things to try to have on hand, because you're not going to find it when you need it.
Yeah, and we talk a lot on the website, and Jamie, you've heard me say it over and over and over and over. The day you get a sheep, or you get a goat, or you get livestock on your farm, you need to reach out and establish a relationship with a veterinarian. They don't mind. Call them and say, hey, I've got this going on, and this is where I live. And a lot of times vets will give you after hours numbers to call. They'll give you some, because this stuff is going to happen in the middle of the night. It's going to happen on the weekend, and you're in big trouble. You just need to it's so easy to do. Call a vet, establish a relationship with a veterinarian before you have problems. That way, when things do happen, it's just one less thing that you have to worry about. Once you get an established relationship, some veterinarians will you have some medications possibly on hand that will be there when you need them. As far as what you said about the calcium, yeah, absolutely. I mean, unless these people are like pushing IV calcium, I mean, to overdose them on, it's not going to be that big of a deal. And I had read that about the box red one, which I guess when you go there mentally, it makes sense. It's alcohol is super high energy. It's one of the highest nutrients that we can take. So that helps. The question that Alicia had was, she said, how often do you have to intervene in delivery? So my quick thoughts on that are, it depends. It depends on how long you've had your flock, what you're doing as far as culling is concerned. So kind of walk me through that, guys, as far as looking at, if you have a ewe that is having problems with delivery, or having vaginal prolapse, or having some of these birthing issues, is that something you automatically cull? And would you go as far as to say, if we're constantly having problems intervening with delivery, is that more of a problem on their side of not managing animals well, or what's your thoughts on that?
I feel like the ones that we have seen have delivery problems for the most part.
It's my
At
fault.
least here,
My fault.
it has been man-made.
I got them too fat.
It's been
Don't judge.
over conditioning.
Yeah.
In some instances, and we had one this year, we used a different ram. We was wanting to kind of play around, see what it was going to do with a yearling. And those babies were a little big,
Huge.
but that was a really big ram. And
he was 14.9 when he was born in the middle of an ice storm. I should have known that he was going to throw big lambs. And then that coupled with having to feed all the grain that we had to this year, I should have in the back of my head known that there were going to be issues. But for the most part, don't be hasty. Don't be rash about your culling decisions until you know, is this a you problem? A you as in the sheep out in the field problem, or a you problem? Because, you may think, oh, that ewes had problems, I'm going to cull her. And then, 6-7 ewes down the line realize, that might not have been actually her problem. I definitely don't cull ewes before they've weaned their lambs. And that, being another benefit of grouping kind of tightly, you'll know quickly if you're the one that screwed something up. And if it's not the ewes problem. I think of the about 35 that we've lambed out so far since about November, we've had to help 3. One of those being a set of twins that were too big for the ewe. And then one of them being, it probably would have been fine on its own, but a really big ram lamb that was kind of shoulder locked. And then a set of triplets that were tangled up in a first time ewe lamb mama. So I don't hold it against the ewe lamb that had triplets. I wasn't expecting her to have triplets. And then the one that I got too fat, that was my bad. Her name is Potato for a reason. And then the one in the middle, she probably could have had it on her own without us having to intervene. So of all 3 of those, none of those are the ewe's fault really. And so I wouldn't consider culling those. Unless, obviously if a ewe's having trouble, you have to help and there's damage done, either the ewe, tears significantly, or, you think something has gone wrong, they prolapse after. There's some studies that say ewes that prolapse because of a, protracted or hard labor, when their entire uterus comes out. If you're able to get the uterus replaced and repaired correctly, they don't have a statistically higher chance of prolapsing again. With that said, that's going to be on a case by case. If they prolapse and that uterus has been out for a while, or you don't like the look of it, that kind of situation, you might consider moving those animals. But if you're there, you get it back in, it stays in without intervention, you might consider giving them another chance and just keep in the back of your mind that this happened last time. I might need to be on the lookout for it again. We have had one case of that, and that ewe went on to have, no trouble the next time, for what it's worth. She's actually raising a set of club lambs right now.
So, Hobie Brian says, I think that nutrition is something that needs to be talked about more often and explained to new farmers. A lot of people have a clue. I think that's true. I think it's a tough thing. And the other thing that doesn't get explained very well is body condition. So we talk, breeders and veterinarians, they talk a lot about body condition, and a lot of people will look at an animal and they're like, oh, she's fat, and she's got this great big belly, but then you put your hands on her ribs and she's skinny as hell. So kind of walk people through, when you say body condition, what do you mean? What are you looking at? And how are you judging what the real body condition is on a sheep or a goat?
So sheep are and goats too. They're going to be different than a lot of your other breeds. You have to lay your hands on them to really get a good feel for what their body condition are, or other species rather. Um, they have that covering, wool, hair. Even on the hair sheep, they're so thick. You have to lay your hands on them, and you're right. You look at them from the side, out in the field. You never get more than 20 feet from them. They look good, but if you get them up and you start working them, you run them through a chute. You can put your hands across their top line, and if you can feel the bony part sticking up, which is the spinous process right down the middle of their back, and if you feel that each vertebra has a wing that sticks off either side of it, if you feel the meat or the coverage between that spinous process and that transverse process, and it makes a decent triangle or a little bit of a round shaped triangle, that's a good flesh. That's a good condition. If you start feeling every turn in that triangle, if you feel an L, then that's a thin animal. It's going to be a low, like a 1 or even a 2. And then if you can't feel the bony processes at all, and it's just rounded like our sheet potato, it's over conditioned. It's really well fleshed, and there's all kinds of charts and diagrams, that you can.
I don't know if you can see it. There you go.
Yeah, that shows you kind of that amount of muscle coverage, but in the grand scheme, you don't want to feel too much bone between those processes, and you don't want to feel no bone. You want somewhere a happy medium between. And for us, going into breeding season, they do a little bit better to not be as fat and as heavy as they are when they are actually lambing and going into time to have lambs.
You can flush them better if they're if not underweight, but if they're, a 2.5, maybe a 3. If you do want to implement a flush program, it's going to work a whole lot better than if they're already at a heavy 3 or even a 4, God forbid. You're not going to get any benefit out of that flushing, and you're also going to run into issues. If they're fat while they're pregnant, you kind of have to maintain that. You can't let them drop weight without running into pregnancy toxemia issues. And so if they're already overweight, at 2, 3, 4 months bred, you're going to really struggle to keep all that weight on them, at least until they lamb.
You can get too much weight at the end too, and do the same exact thing. So really consistency is key. So if going into that first trimester, that first month or so of after they've been bred or exposed, if you can kind of maintain them at that body condition really through lambing, you usually have a lot less problems. I say it all the time, even on other species and other things, change is not good on animals. Animals are creatures of habit, and anything you change, anything that's different in their environment, anything that we do that's different to them, you stand the risk of throwing things off and messing them up.
Yeah, I think we have the benefit with sheep and goats that we have a shorter gestation period where we have time within the year that we can fiddle with body condition a little bit more than some of these animals that have a long gestation period. But I agree, and I think that's something that people really need to understand, is that once an animal is pregnant and going through pregnancy and developing that baby, that's not the time that you can be fiddling with body condition. You miss that window. And as far as flushing, when we talk about flushing, what we're talking about is giving a nutritional boost to that animal prior to estrus that causes them to ovulate a little bit better. Now, if you have an animal that is in pristine condition, flushing isn't going to do you a whole lot of good. But, and of course, we're not telling you to starve your animal out before they go into estrus either. Kind of a happy medium. With that being said, there are some breeders out there with some specific breeds of sheep and goats that they have issues with the animals basically being obese. They're extremely overweight prior to breeding them. I don't want to pick out anyone's name. Say it rhymes with baby doll sheep. So yeah, so I see some of these babies that look like a beach ball, and they're trying to breed them. And Hobie, that can actually cause problems with milk production, issues with labor. That being obese can cause a lot of. It can even hurt their ability to get pregnant. Correct?
It definitely it can hinder the reproduction. They don't cycle like they should.
They lay on fat on their udder that then doesn't produce milk at all. So even if you get them through the pregnancy, well, then they're not going to be able to raise their lambs because they have no ability to raise them.
There's two extremes. You've got the really fat ones you have a lot of that issue with, and then same thing. If there's no fat there, fat is actually important in their reproduction. You just got to have the right amount of fat. You got to have, a decent coverage across their back, like I was talking about on that body condition. You don't want too much and you don't want too little.
So talking about milk production, we spend a lot of time talking about lack of milk and maybe moms that aren't producing a lot of milk. Talk to me about there's a thing called hard bag, to where a bag when I'm saying a bag, I'm saying the bag the milk is in. You can run into issues. You have hard bag. You can also run into mastitis, and I know those are two big heavy duty texts, but can you give folks like a 30,000-foot view of what is hard bag, what does that entail, and what's the difference between hard bag and mastitis?
So I don't know if I'm familiar with the term hard bag. Are you talking about like edema, like when they're
So I'm talking about
like before they
had a udder that has maybe granulomas in it, to where it's hard calcified, to where the bag looks full, but you lay your hands on it and it's rock hard. You're not getting any milk production, versus classic mastitis.
Yeah. So we haven't. We'll see some occasionally on calls where you'll have one that has had mastitis before, and it will actually damage part of that udder, and it shrivels up, dries up, and it gets to where it is scarred in, and it will never produce milk again. It doesn't make milk. You'll get nodules, you'll get knots, like you're talking about, and all of those things are essentially a trauma or a disease to that bag. It's not something that is usually
Fixable.
treatable.
Yeah.
Right. Mastitis, on the other hand, is usually it's painful to them. It's hot when you touch the udder. It's firm, but I wouldn't necessarily call it nodular or hard. Think of it kind of like touching a golf ball versus a orange. You got a little bit of fleshiness, a little bit of give to it still, and that orange, that kind of feel would still fall under the mastitis category more so for me. Where if you've got something really hard, kind of firm, non-movable, that's usually not good.
To add to that, if on a flock kind of height level, if you're having multiple ewes that are having, a hard bag or not producing milk at all, or not producing off of one side, when I hear multiple, I start thinking, okay, you've got something else. You've got either like CAE going on, or you've got, a hygiene issue that has previously caused multiple cases of mastitis across your flock. Laying in mud, laying in a contaminated pack if they're in a barn, something along those lines. When you start seeing multiple sheep with the same issue, you kind of need to start doing a deep dive and figuring out why. Mastitis and hard bags should not be a systemic issue. You may always, run into one or two here or there, but if you're having more than a handful, there's something else most likely going on. Mastitis doesn't really have a genetic component, so if you've got, an ORF outbreak going on, you may run into ewes that have issues with their udders, because ORF can be transmitted through the lambs nursing to their udder. That usually resolves, but then the hard bag on the ewe stays. It may cause permanent damage. CAE, being another one. We don't see that a lot. We don't see it in our flock, obviously, and we don't run across it near as prevalent in the hair sheep, I think, than the wool sheep. Some of the club lamb, circles have had that issue in more recent history. I know there's been a couple big farms with issues lately. If you have a ewe that her udder looks normal, but you're just not getting any milk out of it, CAE would be kind of high on my list. You might want to consider doing a biosecurity screening and see if that does pop positive. If that's the case, there's no fixing it. Those ewes need to be culled.
I've seen young animals too. Like if you've got a weaning pasture, right as you wean, those babies are still looking for something to nurse, and they'll nurse off of each other trying to get milk, and that can cause mastitis in those weanlings. So it's not something that is completely preventable, especially in instances like that. But it's definitely a good idea. Don't just take it for granted and think because you've got mature ewes out there, those are the only ones to watch for mastitis, because you'll get it in those weanlings too.
Yeah, and I'll even check on and a lot of people won't do this, but our ewes during off breeding season, when that bag is back to its normal size, I'll lay my hand on it and feel, and if they have you'll still feel those granulomas, you'll feel that golf ball in there, or that hard spot in there. Sometimes it's not super detrimental to where they're not going to produce milk, but you're feeling a non-pregnant ewe that's in her off season where that bag is completely empty, and you put your hands on it and you feel a baseball sized mass in there of hard calcified starting, like you're probably in trouble next season when they decide they're to drop babies. So
and
go ahead.
And kind of piggyback or add on to one more thing on that. If you have a respiratory issue, go through your lambing group. So if you've got, a couple lambs with pneumonia pop up, or you've got a couple with a cough, that doesn't even necessarily have to be that severe. You really need to keep an eye on your ewes, because the Pasteurella, the bacteria that causes a lot of these upper respiratory diseases in lambs, can also be harbored in a ewe's udder. It may not even cause full-blown mastitis, but it can cause kind of a chronic poor doing udder in some of these ewes. And so that's something to keep in the back of your head. If you're having, an upper respiratory problem in your lambs, they could also, cause issues in your ewes.
Good deal. So we're at about an hour. We're going to wrap it up. Thank everybody for your questions. Jamie and Hobie, thank you very much for joining us today. We will go ahead and upload this in the video description below. We will also put your contact. We're going to put contact information for Jay and Hobie in there as well. So if you guys want to check out their farm, any of their videos that they're putting online, you guys can do that as well. And then obviously on our forum, Jamie and I are always on there. If you guys have questions, Linessa Farm Pack Box is a great place for you guys to go. So guys, thank you very much for joining us today. Go ahead and stay on. I'm going to shut off the feed here and we'll talk real quick. So thank you.
Thanks.